Hi, I'm Dr. Dan Ratner. Today I'm joined once again by Katie, who has been suffering from persistent neck and back pain since 2007, and who is going to continue working with me on the columns. Today we're going to work on the action steps, looking at each column and seeing how is she going to use them, how is she going to use her understanding of it to further her process. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below, and we'll get back to you personally. Katie, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me here again.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
I'm really excited to continue this work. We've done some really good things, I think, in the first 3 sessions, but I'm most pleased that you actually have felt that, and that I can see them resonating with you, and that's what's most important. Ultimately, the columns are to make sense of what we're seeing in the mind-body world and give you a sense of how you can move forward in a different way, because if you're just doing the same thing, you're not going to get anywhere.
Right.
So let me check in with you first. Let me say this. We're going to be working on the action steps today. And the way I think about action steps is we look at each column and what we've done so far, and we start to talk about what do you do with them? What do you do with that? So we're going to spend time on each of the 3 columns and a little bit about the action steps within them. And it's the beginning of a conversation about that. You know, you're going to build out this system over time. So I don't expect us to have all the answers in this one sitting, but at least it can give an idea of how to think about it. So with that in mind, do you feel like you have a good understanding of these 3 columns now? And
yeah, I do.
Okay. And what we've discovered within them about you, it seems like all 3 have been illuminating in one form or another.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so here's what I want to do. First of all, I'm glad to hear that. But what I want to do now is go through each column from an action steps perspective, meaning I want to help you understand what to do with the information you have from each. So we're going to go column by column. I'll pace us. We'll start with the emotions column. We know we built out, I think it was 12 themes. We really hit it right on the mark. And the question here is, what do you do with that information? Do you feel like you know what to do with that information? And if not, I'm going to answer some questions about it. So let's start with what you feel like you understand. How would you use that information going forward?
I've been thinking about it this week. I guess the best answers that I could come up with of things to do moving forward seem like they're related to the emotions column, like protecting myself, putting up boundaries with people, maybe eliminating people from my life that I feel like are not positive in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Just doing things like to try to get my power back, like we were talking about last time.
Okay, this is a good start, but what I'm now gonna do is give you the way that I'm gonna start to give you the way that I think about action steps in the emotions column. And sometimes you're gonna say certain things that may be action steps that I would say, okay, I actually think that would apply in the power column. And this is a good example of that. What you're saying is about kind of reclaiming power, which is great.
Yeah.
But you're going to find that that's more of an action step in the power column, which I wouldn't expect you to know, but this is how we start to organize them and spread them out. So let's back up for a second. In the emotions column, the goals of the emotions column are to recognize which emotional themes are applying to your present day moments, which ones are getting activated, that are leading to onsets and upticks in symptoms.
Yes.
If you identify that and you just can find that pinpointed awareness, you'll have control over acute symptoms, over onsets and upticks. So action steps in the emotions column would be to recognize those themes and how they're relating to your moments, and then make an adjustment just in the way you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing, there's a little bit of a distinction between emotions column action steps and power column action steps. And this is the thing to delineate. Emotions column action steps tend to be about addressing an emotional issue that's upsetting you in the moment. That's really only of the moment. It doesn't have to be about the global picture. When you're thinking about addressing something in more of a global picture, that's going to be a power column action step. But I want to see, does that make sense to you? I can say more about it.
Yeah, keep going.
When we get to the power column action steps, I think that'll make even more sense. But what I want you to do in terms of action steps in the emotions column, first of all, I want you to think about the timing of the symptom, if it's an onset or an uptick. I want you to be able to recognize what column are you working in, because first and foremost, when it comes to action steps, you have to identify which is the primary column of this moment. So you have been dealing with some seemingly chronic symptoms that are just always there. Those are not likely to be emotions column things, but you, like anybody else, are going to have emotions column symptoms. Could be not feeling well at a certain point, could be a sudden headache, maybe there's an uptick in the neck pain or something like that relates to what's happening here. And so the goal is to use the timing to figure out which of these themes is active right now. I think you understood that, but I just wanted to make sure, because one of the things I want to leave you with is some action steps. What do you do? How do you use these columns? So you're going to take those themes and match them up to the present day moment, figure out which one's bothering you, and that is when you'll say, all right, now what do I do about this emotional situation? If it is something that's more just of the moment and just takes and I'll give you an example in a second, takes like a little adjustment, you'll do that. If it's more global, we're going to shift over to the power column and think, how does this fit into the big picture of my life?
Okay.
I'm going to make this more concrete so you understand the distinction between the two. So let's say that you are having an interaction. What's a good example? Let's say you're having an interaction with a friend and you start to not feel so well all of a sudden, but you don't know why. Well, in the emotions column, you're going to take your body at its word. That's an action step in and of itself because it's a different way of thinking. And you're going to say, every symptom I have relates to something that is emotional, if it's an onset or an uptick. This is a sudden onset. What's happening? And then you will look at those 12 themes. Now, are you going to actually go look at your list? Probably not. But if you've got them well organized in your mind, then it's just your natural way of thinking. And you might look and say, in fact, I'm going to pull up your list now to make this really concrete for you. Give me 1 second. All right. So I'm looking at your themes now. Let's say that you're having an interaction with this friend and they kind of didn't have your back, weren't protecting you in a situation. Like somebody else said something bad and then your friend didn't really back you up. And then suddenly you're feeling sick. That's an example of an emotions column symptom coming up that you can recognize the theme. Now, do you need to do something about that friend particularly? Not necessarily. I'm going to show you the difference between an emotions column action step and power column action step because in this case, there's a lot of overlap. The emotions column action step could be simply being aware of it and kind of raging internally, being like, this friend isn't as good a friend as I thought they were and it makes me really mad, where you don't even need to do anything outwardly. In general, emotions column action steps don't require any outward response.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just about the awareness. Now, you could have an outward response, but usually that's going to be more in the power column because it relates to what do you do more globally. So you could just say, okay, I'm aware that this person didn't feel safe at this moment. I feel really mad about it. I'm going to connect to how I've had that in the past over and over, and I'm going to think about that. I'm going to think emotionally, and that's going to take away the symptom. Now, remember, the goal in the emotions column is to take away acute symptoms. It's not necessarily to change your life or, shift things around. That's the power column. I just wanted to make that distinction. That make sense?
Yep, totally.
And listen, these are, they're both good things to do, but I just think from an organization standpoint, it'll help you to understand what do you do in each column.
Right.
In the emotions column, you just want to see that pairing so that you can take away acute symptoms. That's the power of the emotions column. to use a confusing term since I'm using power to speak about emotions. But that is the superpower, I guess I would say, of the emotions column, is to take away symptoms by awareness. Don't need to do anything else. Right? Now, what you decide to do about this friendship or friendships like it, that's more global. So that's going to fit in the power column. Okay, let me pause for a second. Do you feel like you understand then what the general action step is of the emotions column, or the way to think about action steps in the emotions column?
Yes, and that's very helpful. I feel like, for many, many years of this pain, I wouldn't have made that connection where an acute symptom is happening. So, my jaw is really tight and my neck is extra tight. In the past, I would have thought, what was the physical thing that I did? Maybe it was because I lifted that box.
Exactly.
But now I can realize I just had this fight with my sister on the phone.
There you go. So,
and it's that.
Exactly. So you can start to apply not just onsets where a new symptom pops up, but an uptick in the symptom that's always there. It's not an accident. I never think physically. I mean, look, if I get hit by a truck, I'll think physically. But barring huge, obvious things that happen right away, I think emotionally. And so even if it's a seemingly chronic symptom, if there's an uptick, that's an emotions column thing. And it sounds like you've been doing some thinking about this and able to recognize, oh, that happened for a reason, and it's an emotional reason. That's how we use the emotions column.
That's great. Just stopping and making that connection is a huge difference than what I was doing before or not doing.
Right. And listen, every time we hit on something that's very different from what you were doing before, that makes sense to you and makes a full sense of the picture, that brings more hope that you're going to be totally fine.
Mm-hmm.
Because ultimately, symptoms are only to be understood. And this is a way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So
great.
I feel like we've got the emotions column in a pretty good place. We've got the themes. You know how to use them. You understand kind of what the action step kind of oriented things are. It's just about using the tenets of the emotions column to get the awareness.
Yes.
Now, the emotions column in this way helps with doubt, by the way, because as you were saying, this isn't about anything physical. I can see that this is something emotional. You can actually see the connection. That's going to bring down doubt. So the columns work with each other, but you understand how to use the emotions column. Let's shift over to the doubt column for a sec here. Okay. I'm going to go through each column, and then we're going to do some review and wrap up on it. In the doubt column, there's a different goal, and there's a different symptom profile that we're looking for. It's not about onsets and upticks. It's about those symptoms that have just kind of always been there or are always at a similar level, or even symptoms that are repeated over and over and over. Let's say, I don't think you have this, but let's say you're getting sinus infections over and over and over and over and over. I would start to wonder, is that actually an emotions column event, or is that a doubt
Headache
column
is
event?
one you could use for me, because that actually is like a symptom over and over and over that's not chronic but keeps reappearing.
Right. So in that case, I'd first look in the emotions column at that given moment, because it can just be repeated emotional experience. But if you're not getting resolution there and you're not seeing what it relates to, you could start to wonder, is this because I have a recurring thought process that I'm always going to get headaches? It just happens. And we got to look at that thought process. So where we look at emotions and timing and think emotionally in the emotions column, in the doubt column, we're going to think about, what are we actually thinking about our mind-body experience? And you were kind of doing that, recognizing, I had been thinking about it as, what did I last do physically that could lead to this? You can hear this, the way you're thinking is already shifting. Mm-hmm. But remember when we started articulating some of these doubts? We got them written down. I'm going to go to them now, actually, just take a quick peek. So here's one as an example. Maybe I wasn't using my muscles. Maybe I was slumping over. During dance, my posture was really open. When I quit dance, I lost that, and I had slumped over body position as a photographer. Mm-hmm. You identified those specific words that you're saying to yourself. In the doubt column, one of the things that we don't do so well until we start using the doubt column is to recognize what we're saying to ourselves. So I want to remind you of the tasks of the doubt column. Observe, articulate, and counter. Let's go over what those mean, and then we can talk about what it means for action steps. Because actually, in some ways, observe, articulate, and counter, all three of them are action steps in and of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is observe. Observe means, essentially, you've got to start to call into question everything you've been thinking about this. It doesn't mean everything you've been thinking about this is wrong. It just means it needs to be looked at again. You got to kind of run it through the internal machine in your brain that's going to think, is this a doubt or is it true? Because very often we know we're having these thoughts, but here's the problem. We often think that they're true. If you think it's true 100% and you're not challenging it, you're not observing a doubt. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, so one of the action steps is assume you're doubting. Almost all the time. First line of defense, assume you're doubting and check how. What am I doubting here? Okay? Then you're going to get that articulated. This is another action step. Getting it articulated is just what we did with me and you, but now you're going to start to do it with yourself. You're going to say, now what am I actually thinking? You might write it down or you might just do it in your thinking, but you want to get it articulated because you can't counter a doubt that's not articulated. And you certainly can't counter a doubt that isn't even observed, that you think is true. You're not even going to bother to counter that. So observe and articulate set us up for what is the main action step of the doubt column, which is to counter these doubts. One of the ways that we did in our doubt column session was, this was a very effective counter. I showed you the one I just read about slumping over and dance and the transition. It mirrored your psychology so exactly that it didn't really make any more sense anymore, that it was just a purely physical worry. It mirrored your psychology. And that was the thing that helped you say, yeah, that's doubt. I can't believe in it at the same level. We're taking them apart little by little. And I want to give you another action step to think about in the doubt column.
Okay.
When you master one doubt, you weaken them all. So don't get overwhelmed by the amount of doubt you have. Every single person has hundreds and even thousands of doubts. Because remember, a question even is a doubt. How many of those do we have?
Right.
Thousands. But they start to shrink, and the questions start to become more nuanced, and they become kind of higher level questions where we understand things generally. We just need to zone in even more specifically. And as we work at it, the doubts shrink and shrink and shrink, and we start to feel like, okay, I'm feeling more and more certain. Here is another action step in the doubt column I want you to think about. In shrinking doubt, we want to move from forms of doubt that are very disabling to forms of doubt we can work with. There's a spectrum. Fear is the worst. When you're afraid, you can't do anything. You can barely even think straight. So the first step is dial down fear in whatever way. The columns, by the way, help with that. At least you have a system that is designed to help with this. You can fall back on it. You can make sense of it. You know I'm out there, so you can get some answers. Fear can go down. Fear also comes down by seeing like those emotional connections. It's making sense now. Instead of, what makes us more afraid than we've got this random thing that we can't figure out? Right. How are we ever going to get out of that? Fear just stays really high then. We've already brought down fear a lot with these sessions. And we're going to keep bringing it down. When you bring down fear enough, then what's underneath it? Usually that's the next form of doubt down the rung on the spectrum, which is confusion. Okay, I'm not as scared as I was. I still really don't know what's going on. I would argue we're largely past that with you.
Mm-hmm.
The columns have provided an organized system and an explanation of things enough that mostly confusion's not there. We're at just the right place, okay? Now, the other two forms of doubt are uncertainty, which is just doubt defined, essentially, but it's very garden variety. We're not afraid, we're not totally confused, but we're just not certain yet. I think there's some of that for you still left.
Mm-hmm.
And then the gold standard of doubt is questions. Ultimately, we want it reduced to curious questions where you really just want to know the answer. They're not driven by fear at all. But if they're kind of questions that if you said to yourself, if I got this question answered to my satisfaction, would that bring down my overall doubt? Would that give me confidence that this is going to work? If that's the case, that's a question you need answered.
Right.
Is that making sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I want you to chime in, though, with anything that isn't making sense. Remember, all of this is about it making sense to you.
Yep.
So just make sure you're not being too much of a goodess and telling me what I want to hear. Jump in. Jump in and tell me if you're like, no, actually, I don't totally follow that, or I don't know that I get that yet. That's
no,
okay.
I feel like you're right on, and probably like somewhat in like uncertainty, lack of certainty, and then also, I guess I had questions, but I started writing down my questions last week, and I was able to answer my questions myself after our last session.
Right.
Every single one, 1, 2, 3, 4 different questions.
Wow.
After I wrote it, I immediately knew the answer.
Oh my God, isn't that great? Now let me ask you a question. Why were you able to answer them in your mind? What was the thing that helped you do it?
I mean, I guess because we had just talked about them. It was just mostly sort of physical things, like, why does my back hurt? Why does it continue to hurt? And I'm just saying, well, we've been talking about this for all of these sessions.
You now have an answer.
Yep.
And not only that, it sounds like well, I know it from what you're saying. It's an answer that makes sense to you.
Mm-hmm.
I say to people all the time, it does not matter if it makes sense to me. Because when you walk away from these sessions, you don't bring my brain with you. You have your brain. It has to make sense to you. The good news is it is making sense to you, so much so that you could answer your own questions.
Mm-hmm. Another question was, why aren't my TMS treatments working? And that's something that you had just directly answered when we talked about the doubt column, which is like, you're still having doubts, and they might be deep, very deep, but you just have to like find them and expose them.
Absolutely. And now I want to highlight something. Those 2 questions you voiced, and I know there were more that you answered. Every time you get a question answered, now you don't need to waste time on those. And I'm not saying they're a waste of time. I'm just saying now you're free to spend time on other questions that now you need answered, maybe more, or just next. The more you get these questions answered and certain, the better it is. I mean, one of the reasons I started doing what I do is that I had lots of questions I need answered, and finally I got them all answered. They were either answered by Dr. Sarno, or when I went to see Eric Sherman, or when I read other mind-body books, or when I experimented with my own system, or as I worked with people. I just kept getting more and more questions answered. So now I actually feel like I can't even think of a question that people ask me that I'm like, ooh, I have no idea. I don't actually feel that way. And you're going to come to feel that way. And you've already made huge, huge progress in that. I mean, this is only our 4th session, and even before this session, you already were answering your own questions.
Right.
That's incredible. How does it make you feel in terms of your optimism that you can get better? That's the real question, because you have to feel confident you can do this.
Yeah, no, I feel great. I mean, it's all there. I guess it's just a matter of like keeping this in the front of my mind, not slipping back into old thought patterns.
That's right.
And just, reviewing.
Yeah. So one of the things you're going to need to watch out for in the doubt column is the doubt is going to try to come back in. And not only that, it's going to try to come back in new forms because you've solved the old ones. Now it's going to say, okay, but what about this? What about this? Or it can even sneak in very subtle ways. So one of the action steps in the doubt column is to look for the subtle ways the doubt comes back in.
Mm-hmm.
It can do that in all sorts of ways. It could get you by saying, yeah, you're getting better. But you'll never get all the way better. Boom, a doubt is there. We've got to challenge that. Always challenge every doubt. We've got to ferociously attack doubt at all corners. And we've got to recognize it. You know, I can't tell you how many times this happens, but usually people get a lot of help from the column system, and generally speaking, they do very well with it. But I can't tell you how many times it happens where people come back to me and they'll say, I don't know, I just feel like I'm not really getting fully better. And I say, okay, wait, hold on a second. Do you remember where you were? They forget. And doubt works on that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and we've got to remind ourselves, wait a minute, how far have we already come? Because that can remind us we can go even further. So don't take your foot off the gas when it comes to doubt.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They now that I'm noticing them, they do just fire in all the time, and because I'm recognizing them now. Like I started doing boxing classes recently, and I have like the doubts and the fear are just flinging into my mind. Oh no, your back, your neck, like you're gonna get hurt. I mean, I'm not even. We're not doing impact. I'm just like jumping rope and hitting a bag and stuff.
Yeah.
So
right.
I'm just trying to like soothe my mind. This is just thoughts. This is just fear and doubt. I'm okay. I can do this. I'm strong. But I just have noticed since we started talking about this how frequent they are.
Well, it's a very big and good step that you're able to see that. It's gonna give you a big leg up on doubt. You just have to keep exposing it, observing it, articulating it, and countering it. And you do it over and over. And as you do it, I want to encourage you about something. This is going to become automatic. It's the way I think all the time. I can recognize doubt so quickly. Now, I don't want to mislead you, though. Doubt does sometimes sneak in through the back door somehow with me in like a new symptom or a new presentation. It can even come sometimes it tries to attack. This is kind of hilarious, but sometimes it tries to attack me and get me to think, maybe your system's not that good. Maybe this person didn't get better because of your system. Well, guess what? That's my own doubt coming in, right? And I need to say back to it, science, logic, and facts. And essentially what I say is, oh yeah? If my system isn't so good, how come I've been helping thousands of people?
Right.
I push back against the doubt, but we always must push back against it or it stays.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to become automatic. You're just going to be like a doubt pushing machine, but it just takes some practice. And this is one of the reasons why, a lot of times people find the seminars and the groups particularly helpful. It's practice. I mean, the seminars give you the kind of information I've given you here, but the groups are a way of continuing to practice. And you don't need it for that long. I know some people, they'll come to the groups for maybe a couple months. They'll practice. They'll feel in really good shape. They'll go on their way.
Yeah.
So you're going to need to practice in one form or another, but that's what I want you thinking about. Okay, so we've covered emotions column, basically what to do, doubt column, basically what to do. There's specifics in each that I'm always going to be able to shed more light on, and if you need my input, do let me know. But let's go over to the power column for a little bit, and what are you going to do about that? How do you utilize the information? So first of all, I want to remind you and really the viewers as well of what information we found. We did this core narrative, which I found to be really moving. It was incredibly powerful. We hung on every word in terms of figuring out what really applies here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take this information out for a spin. There's two tasks in the power column. One is to measure the current moment against this core narrative. So whatever's happening, I want you to think about this core narrative, which, by the way, again, you're not going to read it over all the time. I mean, you could for a little bit. But ultimately, you want to feel like you just understand it. The core narrative is a part of who you are. It's your core suffering self. You'll be able to carry it with you everywhere you go. I know exactly who I am at my core suffering self. I bring it with me to every single moment, but I don't need to work at it. I just know it. It's a part of how I think now. The place where I do need to work at it is to say, okay, this thing that's happening in the present, how does it fit? How does it fit with my core narrative? So as an example, I got pushed around a lot when I was growing up. I certainly wouldn't say that I was bullied or I was one of these kids who was picked on all the time. It was actually more, in my family setup. It was more in people not believing in what I was thinking, not supporting me and helping me grow. And so when that happens in my present day life in some way, I need to know about it. I'm going to give you an example. This is from a long time ago, but when I went to undergrad, I was at college and I was playing on this basketball team. And I had a lot of skill, but I did not have a lot of confidence. And these other players had more confidence than me, but probably less skill, honestly. But they kept diminishing me. They weren't valuing me. And that was repeating my core narrative pain experience. Those first two sentences, not the third where we take action against it. If I could go back in time, I know what I would do. I would say something like, guys, you don't realize it, but I actually probably have more talent than anyone on this team. You need to bring me along. You need to up my confidence. That's the only thing I'm missing. And if you can't do that, I want to walk out on this team. I don't want to sit around here.
Yeah.
That would be a way of measuring the present moment against the core narrative and using the knowledge of the core narrative to make that decision to live differently. That's sentence 3, right? So I'm going to read your sentence 3 just so you know, because this is very action step oriented. I will now fight an everyday rebellion against the ways I have been portrayed so that I do not join that view of me and can accept my true self as someone who is valid, completely worth liking and loving, and deserving of caring for myself, just like I care for my 3-year-old son, guarding him with my life. So I can let go of any shame and self-hate, see that my suffering was not my own doing, and expecting that anyone new in my world will join me in showing me this respect and love. And there's a way in which, from what I've heard, your latest relationship does mirror this kind of thing. I don't know if it does at the level you need it to yet, but it's getting there. Somewhere you've already been kind of doing this work, but this kind of codifies it. It shows you what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, measuring the moment against this core narrative is it's a way to understand where you are situated in a given moment. And then, at the beginning, when we were talking about the emotions column and you were saying, maybe I should make different choices. Right. This is where it happens.
Right.
Right? So let's talk about it. What ideas do you have about some different choices, some action steps you could take in these situations that you're going to either try to build in or maybe already have started to build in?
So one of the ones, let me try to think about how to verbalize this, is presenting myself exactly how I feel, exactly as I am, and realizing that it may be rejected or accepted, and whatever happens, however other people judge or take it, that's not up to me, and that's just what happened. So not molding myself to be people-pleasing or to be so crazy scared about what is this going to do if I say this? I shouldn't say that. I should repress or hide this. So I think that that's probably the biggest one to me, expressing what I feel like I want to express and realizing this is me, you take it or leave it.
I love that. It's really exciting to hear you say that. Yes, exactly. And the people who take it like you, They like you for who you are. And the people who don't, well, those aren't your people. And that's their problem. So I actually, it's kind of funny. I have a t-shirt that I saw online and I was like, ooh, I have to have that. It says, be you, they'll adjust.
Right. Exactly.
And that's exactly what you're saying. And I'm telling you, I wear this shirt and everywhere I go, people are like, I like your shirt. I like your shirt. And why do they like it? It's because people understand exactly what I'm talking about. We've all been grappling with this. And to get to a point where you say, and this is a power column action step, I'm not going to give people the power over me anymore to stop me from being me. I'm going to go ahead and be me. And if they like it, great. And if they don't, I do not care. I used to say, go ahead.
It helps my confidence in me too. It's like I'm defending myself by doing that, which I've spent my whole life molding myself like clay to what I thought people wanted me to be or to fit in and be correct for whatever. But if I can, the more I practice this, the more it's going to make me feel confident and good about myself.
That's right. And, I hope it's helpful to hear. I can see a difference right now.
Great.
I can see you grasping it. You get the gist of it, and I can see you feeling more optimistic and powerful, and that's just going to grow.
Yeah, it feels good inside. It's important. It makes me sad that it's taken this long, but I'm glad that I'm here now.
Yeah, and listen, you're not that late to the party. There's a lot. In fact, I would say you're late at all. This is usually around the time people kind of figure it out. It took me over 40 years.
Yeah.
But I get to live the entire second half of my life with it. And it's all from the things that I learned. So this is exciting stuff. Now, I want to say one other thing. This is a power column action step, but it actually is an action step of all the columns. You must think in moment-to-moment terms. Wherever we're at, it's moment-to-moment. So you might be feeling powerful at the moment and think, yeah, okay, I get it. I'm going to be me. What happens, though, when you're in a moment and somebody knocks you down a peg or doesn't like you and suddenly you sink a little bit low? You have to use this again. Utilize it all again. Right? Get right back in there and say, all right, I got knocked out of power. I'm going to get back in. Now, that's the second task of the power column, is to measure your moments in terms of power. Are you in power in your relationship with yourself? Are you in power in your relationship with whatever other person you're interacting with or all the other people? And are you in power with your symptoms? You've got to learn to recognize when you've slipped out of power. And then you got to figure out how to climb back in. Does that make sense?
Can I give you an example? The power slipped a few days ago. I could feel it. It was strong. So I'm an artist, and I found out that there was an art show that I submitted 3 paintings to, and I thought I was a shoo-in to get into this art show, and I got a rejection letter. And it just started me spiraling. It's screwed up my work day. Oh gosh, you're not good enough. You're not worth anything. You can't even get into this little art show, but you've been in so many bigger, more important art shows.
Right. Yep. And I think
the power was gone then.
Right. And so let me ask a question then. What did you do with the fact that the power was gone? First of all, did you recognize it right away?
I feel like that's probably the biggest thing that I did, is I was able to notice it happening in my mind. Notice this thing, me reacting like that and feeling, okay, this is like a triggering event for me, because not feeling good enough or not feeling accepted is a big emotional, historical thing.
Absolutely. Okay, so go ahead.
But then beyond that, I didn't really know what to do. But I did recognize it for what it was.
Okay, but listen, recognizing things for what they are is at least half the battle. That's what these columns are for, is to recognize what the problem is in the moment. You recognized it. It was a power column thing. You had slipped out of power. You knew exactly what the problem was. So it's funny. In a way, you could think about the columns as a very simple thing of they're an organizing system that helps you recognize what the problem is. And by recognizing what the problem is, you have much more of a chance of making an adjustment.
Mm-hmm.
So now let's get over to the adjustment.
Mm-hmm.
How might you have addressed that? I'm going to give you an example of how you might address that.
Great.
I'm not saying this one will necessarily take hold, but I just wanted you to have a concrete example of it. You might say to yourself, I'm going to get rejected by lots of places who don't understand what's special about me. They won't understand it. And that is fine. Here's another example of that. When I was growing up, I used to be kind of baffled by this. It felt to me like in dating, a lot of people would say, oh, you're a catch. And, if I wasn't with somebody, I'd want to date you. I heard that all the time. But then I was single for a long time. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, well, what's going on? There must be something wrong with me, right? I'm the common denominator. And you know what? There's a way in which I was the common denominator, but not in a bad way. The way I was the common denominator is I'm unique. I'm kind of special. And it takes certain people to be able to see that. And so I had to turn it on its head. The same thing is true in this application process that you're talking about. There are going to be all kinds of people who don't understand your art because they're not equipped to. Maybe they haven't had enough life experience to understand what you're saying. Maybe they aren't as wise as you are. Maybe they, are viewing life in a totally different perspective because they have a different mindset entirely, and so they just are completely missing you. But that doesn't mean you're bad. Doesn't necessarily even mean that they're bad, but it's just like, it's like if you were working with a puzzle and two pieces weren't fitting together, you wouldn't say, this one piece has a problem. No. Neither piece has a problem, but they do not go together. It took me a while to realize, you know what? I don't fit with most people. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. Because the people I do fit with, I fit with spectacularly.
Yeah.
And those are the people I'm looking for.
And in the art world, like the people in the whole history of my life that I've connected with the hardest have been artists that are on the same page as me. We just fit together seamlessly. It's like the puzzle pieces just slipped in together.
That's right.
Yeah.
So in the power column, it helps to recognize that we always fit where we fit. We don't need to criticize ourselves if we didn't fit somewhere else because we didn't belong there. And they didn't belong with us. In a way, you could say they didn't deserve us because they just didn't fit. Or maybe they didn't work hard enough at it, or they didn't appreciate us enough. Whatever it is, in the power column, if you can back yourself up and say, you know what, I do actually have inherent value, and the people who really count are going to see it. Mm-hmm. That's a power column action step. That's a way that you can not just recognize that you're out of power, but you can actually climb back into it.
Right. Okay.
All right. Now, there's one last thing I want to do kind of it's a little bit of, I wouldn't even call it review. It's like organizing. I want to help you think about how to think about these action steps because we've been through some things. And of course, you'll be able to watch this again to soak it up more.
Right.
Also, I'm not going anywhere. If you need me, let me know. But the way that I think about these columns is that they are 3 distinct mind-body experiences with distinct tasks within the columns and distinct things we can do to help ourselves there. And I've described each column and some of that today, but now I want to give you a broad, overarching view of that will help you just hold it in your mind. Mm-hmm. All right? Each column has symptoms that come from a different function. In the emotions column, the function is that same thing that Sarno talks about. It's the distraction. The function of the symptom is to distract from a painful emotional experience. If we get access to that painful emotional experience, the function of the symptom is no longer needed and it goes away.
Right.
So you have to remember, what's the function? We're going to take away the function of this column. In the doubt column, the function of the symptom is to get you to believe that the symptom's never going to go away so that it can keep its function. It does not want to lose its function. It's like an alarm, a home security system. It doesn't want to be disabled. It needs to protect you.
Mm-hmm.
But if we dial down any sense of danger, if we get rid of the fear, if we take away the confusion, if we become certain, we get our questions answered, then the system isn't needed, and it knows it's not needed, so it goes away.
Mm-hmm.
Make sense so far?
Yeah, I mean, it made me realize that I was stuck in that doubt column for probably the longest time out of all these years.
Absolutely. And which makes sense. That profile's exactly like that. If you have a symptom that's lasting 15 years, that's doubt column for sure.
Mm-hmm.
The third column, the power column, has a different function. The symptoms have a different function there. What's their function? They are there to communicate to you. They want you to understand your worth. They want you to receive that communication. The core narrative helps us to do that. Recognizing those moments of power and climbing back into them helps us do it. But the bottom line is, if you recognize your worth, then the symptom has achieved its goal in the power column, and it will not be needed anymore.
Mm-hmm.
If you remove all three functions, you basically won't have symptoms. I mean, look, it's the mind-body experience. It's the human experience to have mind-body experience.
Mm-hmm.
So we are going to have symptoms in our lives, but generally speaking, what I find is if you resolve the different functions of the columns, you have the maximum amount of control over acute onsets and upticks in symptoms. You should have absolutely nothing chronic. And you can live a life in the power column where you are receiving the communication of you all the time. What I just said sums up what action steps are really all about. It's just about understanding what is each column about. And if we take away the function of the symptom, you don't have to have the symptom.
And it's funny, it makes you think about the symptom not even necessarily as it being a negative thing, but as it being a communicator. Because if you're saying, in the power column, its function is to communicate to you, its function isn't to disable me, make me not be able to run marathons or something. It's that it's telling me something.
Exactly. So from a doubt column perspective, the 15 years of neck and back pain has been telling you you're having doubt. You don't feel certain about this.
Mm-hmm.
But from a power column perspective, what it's telling you is, Katie, you haven't been valuing yourself enough. You haven't been demanding that the world value you at the level you should be. And I'm not going to go away until you hear the message.
Yeah.
Okay, let's pause for a sec as we finish up here. What do you think? I mean, one thing that I sometimes look out for is I give a lot of information. It could feel a little overwhelming at times, but good news is you get to watch it again and again, and it's all built into this system that can be simplified, just like I did just now. I showed you. There's 3 columns, 3 main functions. You take care of those functions, you won't have symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about the whole thing?
It sounds great. I mean, I feel like you've cracked open a door and I understand what you're saying. And now, even without looking at my notes, the door can't be closed. I get it.
That's right.
And it's just a matter of keeping it on board and remembering it.
I think that's exactly right. All it takes now is practice. My system basically gives you the information you need. It shows you how to practice it, and then I, of course, have various resources through which you can practice. But at this point, you're well on your way. You understand the columns. You know how to utilize them. You've gotten a lot of information and new knowledge about why it's gone the way it's gone, which has got to be relieving.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully I've given you a lot of hope about why you can get better. There's absolutely no reason you can't get better. You just needed the information.
Absolutely. And besides the pain relief, I'm excited about moving forward and treating myself better and having a different mindset.
Yes, I say to people very frequently, ultimately, when you resolve all the columns, you basically go and live in the power column.
Mm-hmm.
You get to live a powerful life, and that's what you're going to do. And I'm excited to be a witness to that.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to keep me updated on things, okay? This has been a pleasure meeting with you in these meetings. And I'm here. We're going to keep building your system within my system. But you get it. I see that you're on your way. Now it's just a matter of time as you practice it.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, thank you so much. I feel a little emotional. Thank you so much, Dan. You just really have cracked open a whole new world for me. And this has gone so much better than I even could have imagined. So I'm really excited.
Well, thank you, Katie. It's an honor. And I know that it's not easy to come here and share you with everybody. It's very generous, and I appreciate it. And I'm glad you were on your way. I'm glad this made a difference. I'm not surprised because I do this, but I'm really happy to see it, and I'm happy for you.
Thank you.
It was really a pleasure working with Katie for multiple reasons, but one of the things that I was very excited about is seeing her kind of come into her own, believing that she actually is worth it. It's an amazing thing. We say these things to ourselves, but it's an amazing thing when you see it start to take hold. When you see somebody start to think, I think that really is true, and I'm going to start treating myself better. She said it herself, that she not only has learned what the columns are and how to recognize what's going on for her, which gives her a lot of hope, but she's also headed towards a better life with herself. I also really was glad to get to be able to talk about some of the simplicity behind what can sometimes feel very complex in the columns, that there are just these basic functions of the symptoms, and when we take them away, the symptoms go away. That organization can really help, and Katie has been a great example of it. As always, I'm grateful to her for having taken the time to come here, work with me, and be generous enough to share it all with you. So thanks so much for watching. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below, and we'll get back to you personally.